Usually with these tech prototypes slash special editions, whatever you want to call this type of shoe, I'm generally not that interested in owning them. I find them interesting from a tech standpoint. I like talking about them, I like looking at them, but I never really want to own one. But this one is different. Take a look at this thing. This thing is a work of art. It is stunning. It's one of the best looking running shoes I think I've ever seen. It's up there with the Vaporfly Next Percent 1, the original one, the Vaporwave one. If there's anyone from Adidas watching this video and they want to figure out a way of getting me a pair of these for me to really get into, run in, break apart, all of that stuff, there's an email in the description, reach out, we'll figure it out. But in all seriousness, I think this shoe is important and there is a ton to talk about. So I think we should just probably jump in. Adidas doesn't want you to buy this shoe. Adidas doesn't want to sell this shoe. The only reason Adidas is selling this shoe is because they're forced to, per the World Athletic regulations. This is a shoe that's listed as a model in the World Athletic regulations, not a development model. It's a model, which means they have to sell it. We're not going to start seeing $500 super shoes. That's not what this is. This is a shoe that they're forced to sell because they have 5 athletes going for the world record in Berlin next week. And to do that, this shoe has to be sold to general consumers. So with the press packet that Adidas put out on news.adidas.com for the Evo 1, there's a ton of photos in there. But there's 4 photos in particular that are fascinating, and I think they really tell the story of what this shoe is. Now, if we look at those photos, this is the first one that really stands out, and this is showing a bunch of shoes lined up left to right that I don't think necessarily show a progression, not in a linear order, but there is a progression here. So if we zoom in on this, and I'm about to get full CSI on this, I think if we start from the left, that first shoe is quite obviously an Adios Pro 3 upper, and I'm going to guess it's on an early development prototype midsole. Maybe it's slightly different foam, it's a little bit different material, whatever it is, but that's probably a very early Adios Pro prototype. Now, the next shoe is the actual release, and I'm using air quotes with release, but it's the Adios Pro 4 release version, the one that was shown at the running event in Austin in December of 2022, and the one that we've seen pop up as the Adios Pro 4 recently across Instagram and on Reddit and every place else. This is the Adios Pro 4, at least what we've been told thus far. The shoe next to it is, I think, the last true Adios Pro 4 prototype. So what happened here with the Adios Pro 4 was that there was a development program to develop a real Adios Pro 4. But what ended up happening was the athletes didn't like the foam, and then Adidas was saying that the durability wasn't there. Now, I talked a lot about this in my Prime X2 Strung video as to what I was thinking, but the short of it is Adidas was really pushing, I think, the boundaries of a new foam, which again, they've confirmed here. The Evo 1 is using a new foam, and we'll get to that. I'll get into that because it's really interesting. But this shoe, the one that you're looking at here, this black one, I think was that final prototype or of that generation that caused the problem where they actually killed the Adios Pro 4 development. And they sort of scurried around, and I think they just stuck a streamlined upper, a simplified upper, because the upper on the Adios Pro 3 is an utter mess. So they put a better upper on the Adios Pro 3 midsole and outsole, and that was going to be the Adios Pro 4. At least what they're going to sell or were going to sell. Now, if we go to the right side of this image, we see some Evo 1 prototypes, kind of. Starting from the left, I think that one with the neon green 3 stripes on it, that looks like, to me, an early prototype of upper experiments. Because again, when a brand is developing a shoe, they're not it's not this clean progression where they just go from like the old shoe and they start to evolve it. They might stick an upper on the old midsole. They'll take the old midsole, put a new upper on it. They might put some new foam in the same mold. It's sort of whatever they have or whatever they're trying to test. And this shoe, I think, is important because it is, I think, the super lightweight upper on essentially what I think is an Adios Pro 3 midsole or maybe one of the early Pro 4 midsoles. But this, I think, when they sort of look back at the Adios Pro 4 program and they were trying to figure out what do we do next, I think they started here, like, okay, and let's really strip this down. As I said, they really leaned in hard to stripping the shoe down. And I think this model is important because that's what they did. This has that ultra lightweight upper. Then you can see the progression to what I think is the V1, because remember the World Athletics, approved shoes has a Evo 1 and an Evo 1 V2. So you can see two versions of the Evo 1. And I think that's what we're looking at is a V1 and a V2. V1 was probably one of the early ones. It was often camouflaged as an Adios Pro 3. I think it's what we saw at the Great North Run. And the Evo 2 is the one that the athletes will have in Berlin and probably for the rest of the World Major Marathons in this fall 2023 season. So to pull it all together, if we put these kind of multiple photos together, the top-down photo we're just looking at with a sort of front view on the table of the shoes lined up in the same orientation, I think this also is very telling because you can see some of the details I just went through the midsoles and the outsoles. So this is essentially what I think we're looking at here. And I think that's why these shoes are on this table, because these are the important models. I think all the other shoes were milestones from the beginning of the program, the point of failure with the Adios Pro 4 program, to what we're now seeing as the release Evo 1, which I think is probably the V2. I think there's 4 key things about this shoe that are really exciting. And I think they're going to set the trend for the Adizero range over the next few years. Let's start with the midsole, because I think that's probably the most interesting part of this shoe. And this midsole in the Evo 1 confirms a bunch of stuff I've been thinking and talking about Adidas for a few months now. Now, in my Primex 2 Strung product analysis video, I went into detail as to why I think that puck, that sandwich between the 2 layers of Lightstrike Pro and the carbon fiber plates, is a different formulation of Lightstrike Pro. Adidas sort of was hinting and saying that it was without really being specific as to what was different about it. Now we've really gotten the confirmation as to what is different. So if we look at this image, again, this was from the press image dump that Adidas gave for the Evo 1, you can see this midsole blank that's been somewhat tooled out for the midsole of the Evo 1. Now, Adidas has confirmed that the midsole foam, this Lightstrike Pro that they're using in the Evo 1, is not a compression molded foam. So compression molded makes a lot of sense because Lightstrike Pro is very dense. Compression, it totally makes sense as to everything going on there. Now, this process, I don't think is injection molding like what Nike was doing with React X foam. I think what we actually have here is an extruded foam blank of whatever the new, more airy version of Lightstrike Pro is, and then they basically cut out the midsole, and then they tool it to finish it. And that's exactly what we're seeing here, because you can actually see the cuts of the shape of the midsole out of a blank of foam. Now, this is interesting because this is actually confirming that Adidas has really been working on a lighter, more airy, softer Lightstrike Pro. What I'm actually shocked about is I figured they would actually give it a different product name. I didn't think they'd just call it Lightstrike Pro. And they may still change the name because this Evo 1 shoe is it's not a prototype, but it's an evolutionary shoe. That's what Evo is. And they could still use some of the DNA in product naming forward. So I could see a Lightstrike Evo foam that would makes sense and tied back to the Evo 1. But the end of the story here is that this is that lighter, more airy, softer, bouncier foam that Adidas has been working on. And where it failed in the Adios Pro 4 in that prototype program is that it's a softer, more open foam. So if you put the carbon rods in that softer foam, I bet the athletes were breaking the rods all the time. And I think that was the durability problem. Maybe early on in the development of this different manufacturing process for this different Lightstrike Pro foam, they were having problems with keeping it airy and not having it compact in the prototypes. That's something they worked through, but I'm sure they probably figured that out now to release a shoe. But I think the athletes were probably breaking the rods, probably compressing the foam. It was probably a mess, and that's why they completely sort of abandoned that, at least for the mainstream Adios Pro shoe. Now, for the Evo 1, because they're saying this shoe literally is only good for one marathon, it literally, I think they're assuming you're going to get maybe 50K out of it. Durability doesn't need to matter. And I said this in my Prime X2 Strung video, that if an elite could have the ultimate racing shoe that literally self-destructed at 42.3 kilometers as soon as they crossed the finish line, and it gave them an advantage in the race, they would wear that. Because an elite racer, they don't care about durability. They just want the shoe to perform for the race, for the marathon. And if it, explodes crossing the finish line, assuming they get it off their feet, they don't care. And that's exactly what the Evo 1 is. Literally has a shelf life of 42.3 kilometers or maybe 50 kilometers, because they say it's going to work for sort of a warm-up and the race, one marathon. And for a prototype special edition shoe like this, that very limited durability of not only the foam, but also the possibility of breaking the rods because you're putting a lot of energy into the midsole, I think Adidas is totally fine with that. Again, this is a development prototype special edition ultra tech shoe that if you're going to buy it, it's understandable that it's not going to last. And they're being very deliberate, telling you very clearly, this shoe will not last. And I think it's all of the things I just went through as to why this shoe won't last. The next really interesting part of this is really on the upper. So if we look at this image, we can see that on the table shot, they actually showed this image initially where there's a bunch of pieces here, but this isn't the final Evo 1 that we actually are seeing released. This is I think a combination of a bunch of pieces. Looking at the upper, I think this upper that was laid out on the table is the upper from that ultra lightweight one. The one that I was saying was probably one of the early upper prototypes that they leaned back into to really strip down this shoe to make the Evo 1. I've been complaining, I guess, about Adidas uppers. The mesh or the Celermesh uppers that they're using are a little too stiff. They don't have any give and they can really abuse your foot. And I think Adidas has probably been working on that. And I think what they've been looking for is a lighter weight mesh material that has more compliance to the foot. So it's going to abuse the foot less, but is ultra lightweight. And I think that's what they found here. And again, putting it on a shoe like the Evo 1, where it's only meant to have, say, 50 kilometers of shelf life, is totally fine because this upper also will not last. But this upper is important because this probably is signifying the future of Adidas uppers. On the Prime X2 Strung, I know everyone seems to love the strung upper, but in all honesty, the strung upper is not a race upper. It's not even a very good upper. It's like all of the Prime X program, it's a development platform. They're developing the strung technology. So what I would expect to see from Adidas now is this new ultra lightweight material that we're seeing on the Evo 1 combined with some strategic strung fibers to reinforce it where it needs to be reinforced, giving us the ultra lightweight but durable upper that I think we're probably going to see on future Adidas Adizero shoes that will have, again, that ultra lightweightness, but will have the durability that we expect. It's not going to be as clunky as a pure strung upper, and it's not going to be their current Celermesh or just mesh uppers and how rough those can be on your feet. It's going to be something that's going to be much better on both counts. The third area is on the outsole. And this, from what Adidas is saying, this is the biggest weight savings of the shoe all around. So looking at this image, I think this is very telling as to what is going on with this new outsole material. It seems like the material that is on the outsole of the Evo 1 is painted or sprayed on. It's not a molded piece like you're seeing to the right of this image, the Continental piece, the traditional thing that we see on the Adios Pro 3 or really any running shoe where they glue it onto the midsole. The midsole material, the rubber they're using, looks like it's painted or sprayed on to the midsole. And if you look at the image that I'm highlighting about those three midsoles, you can see the Adios Pro 3 midsole on the left. In the middle, you see a midsole that looks similar to the Evo 1. And again, that's that, I think, version 1 Evo 1 shoe that we were seeing on the table. But it still looks like a piece of rubber glued to the midsole. But that last one, and then the images on the left there, look like it's sprayed or painted on. It's ultra thin. It's literally a membrane that they're directly applying to the midsole foam. And Adidas is saying that that dropped about 70 grams altogether on the shoe weight. That's a massive weight savings because the rubber on the outsole of running shoes is generally one of the heaviest parts of the shoe. And this is massive weight savings. Now, for the Evo 1, the fact that it's going to last one marathon or 50K, it doesn't need to be that durable. And I don't think we're going to see this sort of painted on membrane-like outsole on mainstream Adidas shoes. But it's an interesting technology, and I think they'll figure out a way of perfecting it, of creating maybe a very, very ultra-thin piece of rubber that will then be glued to the foam in a more traditional way. I think they're developing this technology. I think it's going to be really interesting. And then the last thing that Adidas is actually making a big deal about, but I don't actually understand why they're using the language they are, is the geometry of the midsole. So if we look at this image, which is an Adios Pro 3, my Adios Pro 3, matched up to my Vaporfly 3, you can see the difference of what they're talking about. So Adidas is saying that the Evo 1 has a first of its kind 4-foot rocker placed 60% at the length of the shoe, which, you know, if you look at this image, the 70% mark is about where the rocker pivot point was on the Adios Pro 3, and then the Vaporfly, I'm putting it at about 60. This is not a scientific or exact image, but I'm trying to illustrate the point that by moving the pivot point of the rocker back, they're going to make a more aggressive shoe. They're going to make a shoe that's going to turn over faster. It's going to feel more nimble. The Adios Pro 3, as great as that midsole felt, it could feel a bit roly-poly. It really was designed for you to lock into a pace and maintain that pace for a marathon. And it does that exceptionally well. But it's a little hard to kind of pick up pace in, or it's not the most nimble shoe. It's still a fairly nimble shoe, but it could be more nimble. And by going to that pivot point, move back to the 60% mark, they are effectively making this shoe like a Vaporfly, where it is going to be much more aggressive. You can pick up speed much better. It's going to do better going up hills and down hills. It's going to overall just feel like a faster shoe. And I think that's one of the most exciting things about this shoe is that geometry change, because now it puts this shoe in a performance category very similar to the Vaporfly 3 and even the Metaspeed Sky Plus, which are both, to me, much more nimble shoes than the Adios Pro 3. And that's a big change. And that is super interesting. And it's interesting that it took them 4 generations really to get there. So what does this all mean? Is the Evo 1 going to replace the Adios Pro series? No. I think the Evo 1 is a PR stunt, and it's going to be a tech shoe specifically for their elite athletes, that there'll be a few more pairs out there because they have to sell it. But if they didn't have to sell it, this would never be released to the public. It's going to heavily influence the next few years of the Adizero line. I think the next version of the Adios Pro that we get, whether that's actually going to be a 4 or a 5, is going to be heavily influenced by the Evo 1 from a silhouette, from a materials. I think you're going to get the foam. I think you're actually going to see probably a full carbon plate, or at least webbing between the rods in the energy rod system that effectively gives you a carbon rod / carbon plate, because it's going to need that for durability, especially as we go to a softer, bouncier Lightstrike foam. I'm probably going to make a video about all of the possibilities that they could do with the Adios Pro and what they're going to have to do from a durability standpoint, because there's a lot of options there, and I think there's a lot of things they're probably going to play with. But we're going to see this new foam, we're going to see changes to the rods, and we're going to see the silhouette impact definitely the Adios Pro series and probably the rest of the Adizero line for the next few years. Now, is there going to be an Adios Pro 4? I don't know. It's kind of 50-50 right now, because at the bottom of the press release for the Evo 1, they mentioned that there's going to be some new colorways coming out for the rest of the Adizero line, including the Adios Pro 3. So given that the Evo 1 is getting all the press in all of the people talking about it online, they don't really need to release an Adios Pro 4, at least what we've seen, the leaks that we've seen with that just upper change, because Adidas doesn't really just do upper changes. They did do that with the Takumi Sen, but that's really the first shoe that they did that with. Now that they're getting the PR hit from the Evo 1, they don't really need the Adios Pro 4, at least how we've seen it. They can reserve it for next year for a proper, big change to the Adios Pro. Or they could just skip the Adios Pro 4 altogether, and next year we could see the Adios Pro 5. But whatever comes next, it's going to be heavily influenced by the Evo 1. Thank you for making it to the end of the video. This was a bit of a technical deep dive, but it's an important shoe to talk about. But this is the type of content that I do on this channel. And if you like this content, consider subscribing. You'll see more of it pop up in your feed. If not, drop a like on this video because it helps this channel continue to grow and this type of content gets seen by more people. And with all that being said, I will catch you in the next one.